Alright, so let's start with the second part of the tutorial, where I would like to guide you through a workflow that I somehow established for me over the years, and that I basically go through every time when I start designing a cover. So the first thing that I'm not going to talk much about is, of course, starting to think about the content. This is something that heavily relies on the topic. So of course we are going to skip that, but normally this is a discussion between me and the customer, where I just discuss what is important for them, what they think should be on the cover, and like the core message they would like to get when the viewer sees the cover. So since we are going to design like a dummy version of the cover here, I'm not going to cover that, of course. The second thing is, as I mentioned, the content on that cover is just made up. So there is no real publication behind that. I also pre-made that scene because as all of you can imagine, like designing the cover is always like a back and forth. So you have ideas, you give up on those ideas, you come up with other ones. So it's a lot of inserting, deleting, rearranging, and so on and so forth. I don't want to put you through that complete process because first of all, it's quite lengthy. And second of all, it's painful to watch. So what I did is I prepared the final version of the cover, cleaned it up, and I'm going to take you through it stepwise. And we are going to skip all the trial and error that I did in between. But keep in mind that, of course, also my design process is not like linear like this, but to make it easier for you to watch, we are going to do it that way. So the first thing that I do before I even start thinking about the design is check the technical requirements for the cover. Most of the time my customers send that to me, so they get the instructions from the editor and they just forward the email. That email normally contains requirements concerning resolution, format, and so on and so forth. So the first thing I do is when I load up a new scene is I rearrange my camera. I like to have my camera in alignment with one of the axes, and I always go for the y-axis. This is just like a habit of mine. And the second thing is I make sure that the aspect ratio is correct and also the resolution is correct. With the instructions, they also give you the resolution, which is of course perfect because you then just type it in and the aspect ratio of your camera, of course, comes naturally with that. I normally leave the final resolution or the percentage to 100%. However, when I render the final cover, I always go for twice the resolution. First of all, I do that because it makes it easier for the person who does the final the cover from the journal to have a bit more freedom. So if they would like to zoom in a bit, then the resolution is definitely good enough for them to do those kind of tiny modifications with it. And very often I also provide those high resolution versions then of course to my clients so they can use it for any kind of other material they would like to have it on, like printing or even doing a poster. So we even made like very large versions of covers to be printed as posters. So this is something you can tweak afterwards, but just like something you might think in advance as well. So the next thing that I actually do is I check what kind of area I can use for my design. And I do that by using something which I call a dummy cover. A dummy cover for me, and I'm just going to quickly jump into the rendered mode, looks something like this. So I either take a real cover and remove the imagery, so the content from it, so that I'm just left with the text, or I build that myself, like for example here in Illustrator, where I just add text. Doesn't need to be the correct font or anything, but it should definitely be in the right position, and it should cover approximately the same area. So it doesn't even need to be text. You could also cover those areas with squares. But the purpose of that is it helps me to see what kind of areas I should not touch with details. So especially at the top, of course, that portion of my design should not be detail heavy, and also like the lower portion should be something that is a bit more simple, because it should not interfere with the text that I later on put on top of the cover. So it's quite convenient to have that in your scene. The only thing that you need to make sure is that it is, of course, it has the right size. So, but this can be easily done by just rescaling the image, and then it fits to your camera frame. Here, of course, it's also essential that the image has the same aspect ratio as your camera or the final version of the cover has, of course. So with that in, then I start with the design. And as I said previously, so I'm not going to take you through all the steps like importing and so on and so forth, but I'm going to guide you through the design ideas behind the journal cover. Since this is nothing that correlates with an actual publication, I was quite free to choose whatever topic I want. So I went for an enzyme, which is quite established and quite famous in biocatalysis, because it's around for a very long time and has a lot of applications. And this is an enzyme called CAL-B, or Candida antactis lipase B. And what I decided to do is I just imported that enzyme. So I prepared it actually previously in Chimera, and then I decided to import that enzyme, jump into the solid view, into Blender with I'm not sure, I think it's an inhibitor at the entrance of the active site. While we are at the topic of importing, I would like to quickly mention that there is a new add-on that you can use for importing PDB files as well, which is called Molecular Notes, and it's programmed by Brady. And it is really great and really convenient to have, because it nicely imports PDB structures directly into Blender and transform the information from the PDB file into molecular notes. So you can do a lot of it afterwards. Not only loading is possible, but also getting your MD simulation data into Blender for animation, for example, and many more features. So Brady not only did the add-on, he also has a YouTube channel, if you didn't know yet. I'm going to leave the link for both the add-on and his channel in the description below. And if you check out his channel, definitely leave him a comment and tell him that I say hi. Good. If you are planning to use the add-on, don't forget also to buy him a coffee. He does the development of the add-on for free, so we at least should fuel him with coffee, I would say. For that tutorial, I did not use the add-on, but I am pretty sure that there are going to be plenty of tutorials in the future where we are going to make extensive use of that add-on, because it's really convenient. For now, we are going to stick with the classical route. So here we have the enzyme, then the molecule, and a lot of decoration here that I'm going to guide you through. What I also do most of the time is I not only import the surface, but I also import a cartoon representation, for example. Most of the time I don't need it, but sometimes it's convenient to have it, because it can be quite tricky to incorporate another object into your scene when you already did some modifications, like rescaling, changing the position, the rotation, and so on and so forth. So it's quite convenient to have it. If you don't need it, then you just don't render it, basically. So in my case, I did not use the cartoon representation, but I still kept it here. I'm going to hide it from now. So the design in that case is just based on the surface and also on the molecule that we have here, with the molecule being the main focus. Then you also see that in addition I added a couple of like crystals that you see here, and the design idea in that case was, since lipase comes from an organism that was found in Antarctica, I thought it might be funny to just have those kind of icy-like crystals. The way those crystals are done is by using geometry nodes. It's a very simple setup, as you can see here. I am not an expert on geometry nodes at all. I'm very slow when it comes to building them. So don't quote me on that kind of setup, but if you want, of course, you can take it as it is. By the way, I'm also going to leave the original blend file in the description for download, so you can have a detailed look on how it is built. afterwards if you would like to know anything that I probably forgot to mention here. So this is the setup of the crystals in the background, and they are also linked to an object, and that is a sphere that is currently hidden but is in the middle of the active site pocket. And as you can see, if you move that sphere, also the crystals move. And this is also how the animation at the beginning of the video in the intro was basically done. Of course, this is not part of the render, so the sphere is going to be hidden again. Then concerning the lighting setup for that scene is actually super simple. So if I go into the rendered view again, you see that the complete world color is actually black. There is indirect lighting that comes from the crystals. The crystals in that scenes are just simple icospheres. Those are hidden as well, so I normally just put them somewhere. I actually can't find them. Yeah, here it is. Somewhere in the background. So there is also normally a backdrop, which is this one. And the backdrop also hides normally objects that I use that should not be in the scene, because then otherwise they would give me a lighting that I don't want. So the material of these crystals is also super simple. It is just a glass shader with a bit of emission, a bit of colored emission, because I wanted to have like that bluish tint or that greenish tint, and that is basically it. So if we go back to the front view, we see now that first of all the plane is the backdrop basically is also visible now, but the crystal is hidden behind the plane. The other parts of the lighting is just a very simple sun that is basically hovering above my my enzyme. So it's this one. And then there is, if I zoom in again, there is another light inside of the cavity, and this is just a very simple point light that is, if I select it, we can also check the settings, that has a radius of 0, which gives you very harsh shadows, but also those very nice reflections that you see here. I also decided to have that set to a bit of a warmer tone, because that helps me with the surface and the lighting of this, or the color of the surface a bit. The protein surface itself is also not overly complicated when it comes to shader. It is basically just a principled BSDF with a subsurface color that is has a bluish tint, and the subsurface turned up to 1. You've seen that in previous tutorials of mine, that I really like to play with the subsurface. That also comes with a catch, and this is rendering time. Subsurface is quite harsh on your computer, and to have it look very smoothly, you might need to increase the samples for sure. So I rendered, I think the final version of that, I rendered with 212 samples. If your computer doesn't have that many resources, that is a huge downside, of course. But the positive thing is that it really creates that kind of, it looks like skin or something like this, or like a living thing, basically. The small molecule here has also very simple shading. It's basically, again, the materials that you see here is, again, principled BSDF, again with a lot of subsurface for every atom type in the corresponding color. And yeah, this is basically how it's done, so very simple as well. Then let's check how that would look with our dummy object or our dummy cover. So as you can see, the scene is rather dark in that case. So it's a bit hard to see where the lower part of the cover is. So what I normally do is I just activate the dynamic sky add-on, or if you have another add-on, I have also like the Pro Lighting skies. You can also activate that, but that comes, yeah, that's a free version. And I just quickly activate that to see the completely lit scene in that case. That, by the way, might also be a good look, to be honest, but I'm going to go for a dark look today. So, but now I can see the text and all the lines, and I can see that most of the objects are actually not interfering with the text, and the bottom for sure is left empty, so there could be even more text, so a bit more freedom here, and also the title fits nicely. With that, I'm going to switch back to my dark version of the cover, and I'm also going to hide the dummy cover. And the last thing that I normally incorporate, and this is something also, if you watched any of my other tutorials, you know that already, I'm a huge fan of depth of field. So I'm going to just go quickly into the camera menu. I have the presettings already here, so this is again something where you need to check, you need to tweak them a bit and just activate depth of field. With this, I make sure that the focus is really set on one object. And you see that now everything in the background, like the details that you have in the active site cavity, are more blurry, but the entrance and the molecule are sharp. And this is exactly what I would like to have. I think, and this is my opinion, that depth of field is really something that is needed for covers like this, or for anything that is supposed to look somewhat realistic. This is how cameras would actually handle that. And this creates that semi-realistic look that we are normally going for when we do any kind of 3D rendering. And I know that it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I personally think that it adds a lot to the photorealism that we are looking for. And that would be basically it. So, of course, as I said before, that was a very concise way on how to approach it, but it features a lot of the techniques that I always repeat whenever I go for a cover. So with that, I think I covered everything that I wanted to show you in Blender. As I said, if you would like to have an in-depth view of that scene, definitely use the link in the description and download it. And take a closer look on how everything is arranged and how the settings are, the materials. But as you've seen already, they are not overly complicated, and it's a very simple setup. So before I end, I would like to mention one thing, and this is what I'm also made a habit, is that I normally provide my customers with like the mock-up version of the cover as well, because then it's easier for them to see what the final cover might look like. So I go back and also combine now the text that I used previously with the final rendered image, and provide that as an insight as well. Because sometimes it's difficult to imagine how the final cover would look like by just seeing the image, and that kind of mock-up version or the overlay definitely helps. By doing so, I can also see if there are any more corrections needed. So for example, if in the upper area, if that would be too light, then I could try to adjust the light sources. But you can of course also do some post changes. So for example, if you have the feeling that that area here would be a bit too light, you can also modify that afterwards by just introducing like a gradient or something like this. Let me do that quickly. And to see the effect of that. So let's change that to black. Now of course my order is wrong. So that would be like a quick fix. So if the upper part would be too dark, you could also go ahead and change that by post modifying the image outside of Blender, or you can also do the adjustments in Blender, of course. Okay, so with that, I hope that I think I could give you some, at least tiny tips and tricks on how to approach cover design, and to make it a bit easier for you to get into that topic. If you have any questions concerning that topic, or if you would like to have a follow-up video on any kind of specific topic, definitely leave the questions down below in the comments, for example. Or you can also reach me on Twitter, which is my preferred social media platform, basically. I hope that was useful, and there is nothing left to say but thanks for watching, and enjoy your next Blender project.